So I see a few people coming. Welcome everyone to this webinar in which we will introduce Act for Finance. Before we start, a quick word about the agenda of the session. For you who are already connected and for the ones on the way, we see now that we have around 40 people already. So this webinar will be structured in two parts. First, a 40-minute presentation, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. So you can write down your question in the Zoom chat on the right-hand side of your screen, all along this 1 hour that we will spend together. We will do our best to address some of your questions that you might have during the presentation, and we will answer to the rest during the Q&A part. The objective today is to introduce you to Act for Finance, to understand exactly what is Act methodology, why is it relevant to a financial institution, and also how you can get involved into refining Act for Finance. That's why we are really glad to have you with us today. And we hope to build together Act for Finance and to help financial institutions play their part into the ecological transition. So if I sum up, during the presentation, we will address 4 key questions. First, where does the Act for Finance methodology come from? Second, what is the Act methodology? Then why is Act for Finance relevant to my organization? And finally, how can my organization get involved into Act for Finance? So to answer these questions, I have the pleasure to introduce our 4 speakers today from the French National Agency dedicated to the ecological transition, ADEME. Valérie Quignou, Executive Director in charge of the Foresight and Research Department, DEPR. Hello Valérie. Baptiste Péry-Saint-Faber, Executive Director in charge of the Expertise and the Programs, DEEP. Hello Baptiste. We have also Kim Nguyen Hu and Anatole Mété-Grolier, Climate Finance Analyst working on Act for Finance. Hello Kim and Anatole.
Good afternoon everyone.
And myself, Marine Gombert, Coordinator of the Finance Climate Project. Without further ado, maybe we can start with Valérie. Valérie, could you please introduce where does the Act come from and what is its relation with the Finance Climate Project, please?
Yes, thank you, Marine. But maybe we'll wait for a couple of minutes. I'm not sure that Baptiste has arrived yet. Baptiste, are you with us? Maybe not. And also, Marine, can you share the slides, maybe?
Yes, I let maybe Kim or Anatole take the lead in order for the presentation to be aligned with your presentation.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did that. Just a second.
Sorry, it's a live webinar, so as you can already know, some real in-time issues.
Great. There we are. Okay, thank you, Anatole. Thank you, Marine, for the introduction. So indeed, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your connection today. So following the introduction by Marine, I'd like to give you a bit of the broader picture of where we are and what is the context for this Act for Finance webinar that we are introducing today. So to start with this broader picture that you can see on the screen here, following the Paris Agreement targets in 2015, The European Commission has established a year later an expert group, the HLEG, to produce recommendations on how best to make the financial sector contribute to the achievement of these targets and also contribute to the achievement of sustainable development goals. And it's based on these recommendations that the European Commission has published 2 years later a 10-point action plan on financing sustainable growth. So you can see those 10 points, 10 actions and 10-point action plan on the screen. You might already know a few of them. If I mention, for instance, the EU Sustainable Taxonomy, the labels, also the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, and the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the SFDR. So of course, I mean, the key message on this slide is not to deep dive into these actions, but to understand that there is really a needed contribution from the overall value chain, a contribution to the ecological transition, and this from industries to household throughout the financial institutions and the supervisors. And Anatole, if you can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. So actually, it's in this context that I will now briefly introduce you to the Finance Climate integrated project. Finance Climate is a program financed through the LIFE program managed by the European Commission. And it aims at developing sustainable finance in France and in Europe, and at contributing to the implementation of the French National Low Carbon Strategy, the SNBC, and also the implementation of the European Action Plan for Sustainable Finance, which has been renewed in July 2021. And the objectives of Finance Climate project are therefore to develop new tools, methodologies, and also knowledge, of course, in the 3 pillars that you can see here, 3 pillars of this project, which are namely industry focused, it's pillar 1, household focused, pillar 3, and last but not least, also the financial institutions oriented pillar 2. So it's really in order to integrate climate considerations into risks management, and this from a double materiality perspective, that the consortium of stakeholders which lies behind the Finance Climate project and which is coordinated by ADEME, this consortium are now building tools, and amongst which the ACT, assessing low carbon transition, the ACT methodology, which is our key topic today, applied to the finance sector. And Marine, I hand it over to you now.
Many thanks, Valérie, for the introduction to the relationship between ACT and the European regulatory and project framework. So as we can see, Baptiste is not here yet, so I will handle it to Simon. Simon, could you please explain us what are the key concepts of Act for Finance methodology and what makes it stand out from the various existing initiatives today?
Of course, and thank you very much for all of the work that ADEME has done so far in developing the, I guess, the skeleton for the Act for Finance methodology. So in terms of this slide, what we're looking to explain to you is that in the journey of transition and, I guess, contributing to mitigating and adapting to climate change, there's 4 main steps in this journey. And each step here is associated with an example of relevant initiative, is how we're positioning it. We've used the metaphor of a marathon to try to, I guess, move away from all the technical context that all of you are familiar with, where we can sometimes get a little bit into the detail and move back to a concept which is a bit more understandable to everyone. So in terms of the first step, which is actually the two first steps you see on the screen here, you disclose, you inform people that you will run a marathon. You will probably inform people on your precedent, like your recent marathon performance in the past, your current trainings, how often you run, etc. The same here can apply to company. You disclose all this relevant information, say in the TCFD, so that other people can understand where you currently stand. The next stage, which is the, I guess, the measurement. And within that disclosure bit, so you officially, of course, you register for the marathon, you get your race number, it's associated with you with an estimated running performance. Again, this is kind of the same idea for companies. SBT certifies that you've committed to reach science-based decarbonisation objectives. But still, it's at the end, of the race, once you've crossed the finishing line, that we can assess the achievement of the objective. So next here is the bit around measurement. So what is it possible to do? Is it to use the that is the bit around measurement. And then in the final bit, which is really about assessing and tracking the work that you have done, you demonstrate not only what you've done and how you've achieved it. So here the role of ACT is really to come and help you assess and track your performance on your race to decarbonisation. And to do so, what the ACT tool really does is assesses, or what it's going to do is to assess the company's alignment with the different sectoral decarbonisation pathways, as well as look at a few of the different, I guess, modules and points around governance and integration of, I guess, wider climate concepts and the like into your operations and your, I guess, day-to-day processes. So in terms of if we go to the next slide, please, the ACT initiative, the ACT for Finance, I guess, module or subset is actually in the continuation of a lot of work that has been done by a few, I guess, notable actors, but notably ADEME and CDP, who founded the ACT initiative in 2015. When it was launched, and it's still the case now, it was included in the UNFCCC action agenda. And its key goals here are really to support and assess the company's low carbon strategies and their associated transition plans. So this goes back to what we were saying, just before in terms of the, the main steps and that kind of that marathon concept. Initially, you've told people you're going to run a marathon, so you've done the whole disclosure bit, you've kind of, given your track record and the like. You've then committed to the fact you're going to do it. So that's, when you get the science-based target that comes and stamp it. And now it's like, well, how have you actually done? How well is it? What is your performance against your objective? And this is where ACT, comes in and supports. It really is, in terms of the overall, the 15 different sectors that it looks at, the only international initiative which provides a climate accountability framework to fully assess both the company decarbonisation strategy and the transition plan regarding either well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, depending on the targets that companies set themselves. In terms of the 15 sectors that you can see on the screen just now, the historical methodological development has been focused primarily on the most emissive and intensive sectors. They are all based on the same framework, which we'll come to later, which is going to be explained to you as I guess, from a conceptual perspective, but with sector-specific indicators. In all of the instances here, the methodologies are built with the market for the market, in terms of there's input from a number of stakeholders, whether it's NGOs, academics, professional organizations, and of course companies from that sector specifically. And to date, there's over 400 companies that have committed to ACT. So it is an initiative which is, I guess, constantly growing in terms of I guess, interest and uptake by the market. And we obviously expect that with the development of the ACT for Finance subset, it's going to grow much further and much faster. In terms of, so if we go to the next slide, thank you. In terms of ACT for Finance, the idea, clearly, based on what I've just said, is here is to create a climate accountability framework for financial institutions. So there will be, a number of different types of applications that it can be useful, and a number of different people who will be able to use it. So from a household's perspective, understanding, where financial institutions stand in relation to the target that they need to, that they have, that they have committed, and also that they need to achieve. In terms of financial institutions themselves, the idea here is that there can be a role and a use case for the initiative at all of the different, or almost, I think, virtually all of the different stages of a normal, financing, I guess, process, whether, and also strategic process, whether it's regards to the overall decarbonization strategy, to the definition of credit limits, other investment criteria, the development of financial products and offers, the dialogue, the engagement that you'd be having, of course, depending on the type of financial institution that you are, the ultimate, I guess, monitoring of the financing, and of course, very important, in the extra financial communications. Linked to that, on all these 6 different, I guess, subsets, you get the regulation and the supervision, and then, of course, we'll be able to use this I guess, methodological framework to assess the achievements and the progress that financial institutions have made, both against their own targets and against the, I guess, political and other requirements of said regulations and supervisors. So I think now I'm handing over, I think it's Anatole, I think, who's taking it next, is it, in terms of a bit more detail about the actual methodology. Is that right?
Yes, thank you very much, Simon, for stepping up. So as we've seen, just to sum up, ACT has been successfully implemented in 11 sectors for the past 7 years. So we can see that it enables a climate accountability framework with many use cases, as we've just seen. Now let's move on to our next topic with Anatole. So Anatole, could you please explain us how Act for Finance can address financial institution needs to help them best contribute to the ecological transition?
Sure. Thank you, Marine, and good afternoon, everyone. So maybe I could just focus on one word you just said at the end of your question, is the word role. And actually, I just want to remind the Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, which clearly states and certifies in a way the role of financial institutions towards the net zero objective by 2050, because the Paris Agreement really states the threat of climate change and states that financial institutions have to make have to reorient the financial flow towards a pathway compatible with low greenhouse gas emissions. And this is clearly what we found. This is clearly actually a baseline for our methodology. Our tool is really going to help understand first the position of the financial institution, and also to understand their contribution, which is also a big point on this industry. And for saying that, I can already state that the Act for Finance tool is going to provide a comprehensive assessment of a decarbonization strategy of a financial institution. So basically on the mitigation goal, but still we know that adaptation is also a big thematic. So this is why it's going to be a big work and a big work stream for 2023. And notably, ACT has launched an Act for Adaptation methodology, and it was actually just the webinar the hour ago. So definitely we are going to integrate this thematic in the Act for Finance tool, but later on. Maybe if we go on the next slide, I would like to detail a little bit more on the ACT initiative, because there is a framework, and the idea is really to use the framework that has been developed to date, because this is the same thematic as for the ACT methodology for companies that we are dealing here, which is a transition plan and decarbonization strategy. So basically, the ACT methodology is guiding. The tool that has been built is trying to answer these 5 key questions or principles, let's say. The 5 questions and principles are the following. The first idea is to look at the commitment, so basically the target of the company. What is the company planning to do? Obviously, we are going to analyze and assess what the company is doing today, what is going to get there. and then to understand what it is doing at present, also obviously what it has done in the past. This is the 3 and 4 pillars, and the ultimate pillar is the consistency. So how do all these pillars fit together? And this really gives the big picture of decarbonization strategy analysis. And this was actually the principle of the ACT methodology, and we are going to keep this framework for the Act for Finance methodology as well. We also are going to keep our main scoring philosophy, which is divided between, separated between performance, narrative, and trend scores. So just as a quick overview, the performance score range from 0 to 20. The idea is really to assess the performance of the company. So here it will be the performance of the financial institution. Basically, we use various types of quantitative and qualitative indicators, every time with a past, present, and future perspective. And I believe it's one of the big specificity of ACT is the dynamic approach. We are using dynamic and future indicators when we are assessing the decarbonization strategy. And we are going also to keep this in the tool. The narrative score is, let's say, an external review, because I didn't say that for the performance score, but it's worth mentioning it. In the performance score, we are really using the data from the company itself, while in the narrative assessment, we are using external data. So you can see the point here that we are trying to make a double check and to use not only the data from the company, but also from external data. And the idea is to have a more high level view on the decarbonization strategy of the company. And it's more high level. For the performance score, you have 9 modules. Here you have just for qualitative questions. For the trend score, it's really the idea is really to understand the evolution of the score in the near future. So if you get your company assessed again in 2 or 3 years, what would be the score of your company? Is going to be better, worse, or remain the same? So this is the goal of the trend score. And it's also a big point here is it gives really a dynamic to the score and helps to understand the potential evolution. So I found, yes, this is an important point here. What can I say more is that also ACT and the outputs of the ACT assessment, because beyond these 3 scores, you have obviously a bunch of modules of results on actually some leverages that you can take opportunity of to influence the strategy of your company. And actually, this is a great outputs for financial institutions to date, because it can help to understand the position of the company, their transition plan, and actually to engage with them, and whether it can be on a risk approach or on a contribution approach. For instance, through dialogue or voting rights, it can to date help financial institutions to engage with their counterparties. And this is basically the uses of ACT to date made by financial institutions. But for sure, we want to go beyond that simple use and to assess the overall strategy of a financial institution. And I let Kim detail a little bit more on the matches between the Act for Finance methodology and the Act for Companies methodology, and to go more into details on the different modules. And I would be happy to answer some questions. I can see them in the chat.
Yes, we can answer to 2 questions for now. Maybe first, is CDP still involved for this methodology?
Yes, sure. But we are going to detail this in the last section of this presentation. But yes, definitely they are on the steering committee alongside with WBA. So yes, clearly we are still with CDP.
Okay.
That has been involved in the development of the Act for Companies methodology all along since 2015, as Simon said.
And the second question before moving to the next part, could you please confirm whether the dataset you will use will be open source or only in the model?
Yeah, sure. Good point. Good point if I didn't say that, but yes, definitely it's going to be open source. The methodology, really just like the precedent methodologies for companies. Everything is open source. You can check our website, actinitiative.org, and you can download all the methodologies, the framework, the results of some road testing, and that will be the same for financial institutions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anatole.
Thank you.
So we understand that Act for Finance aims to go beyond in just temperature measurement or portfolio alignment. It consists in a comprehensive assessment of a financial institution's decarbonization strategy and its transition plan through 5 key questions, driving a score obtained on performance, evaluation, and trend. So let's now dive into a first proposal of what Act for Finance could be like for banks, as an example. Please keep in mind that this work is a work in progress as of date, and that the objective is really to refine this proposal in upcoming technical working groups. Kim, if you would present the first proposal for us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Marine. So here you can see on your screen the details of the scores from the general framework. And the goal of the technical working groups will be to adapt this framework for financial institutions. And we think that financial institutions have a very specific way to contribute to the climate transition. And this is by using either their influence with their client relationship, or as shareholders or creditors of companies or projects or consumers. So here you can see the 9 modules of, So because of this specific influence they could have, we think we should split the methodology between 2 distinct methodology, one for the lending activities and one for the investing activities. Here you can see the 9 modules for the performance score, and we will detail it a bit later. Then the 4 criteria for the narrative score, which are the business and strategic model, the business risks, the reputation, and the coherence and credibility. And finally, the 4 trends, which could be improvement, stable, negative, or even not enough confidence, if, for example, we've got unreliable data. So from now on, we'll take the example of the lending activity, and we'll go through through examples of questions or discussions we could have during the technical working groups. So we'll be focused on the performance score for now, and obviously the discussions will also happen on the narrative and trend score. The first question to ask during those technical working groups, previous slide, please, is to assess whether a module is relevant or not for financial institutions. And then the second question will be which indicators within those modules are relevant. So from the 9 original modules, we have to assess if they're relevant for financial institutions. The first one is targets, which will be what are the objectives of decarbonization of financial institutions. Second module is material investment, which is originally the physical assets of companies. And for us, it doesn't make sense to have this module for financial institutions as their main emissions come from their scope 3 or their financed emission, as underlined by the UNEP FI, by the way, that 95 to 97% of their emissions is coming from their scope 3. The third module is intangible investment. And here it's more about the research and development investments. And same, we think that for financial institutions, it's less about technology, it's more about the tools they develop in order to monitor their decarbonization. So we don't think this module is relevant, but we will keep the tool part into the management module. The sold product performance here would be obviously the portfolio performance of the financial institutions, the past, present, and future emission of its portfolio, but we will also look at the locked-in emissions in the long term of the financial institution. The management module, we want to add, not to add, but to highlight even more the risk aspect of this financial module, as it is a really important part of the financial industry. And then we have the whole value chain of the financial institution. So the suppliers engagement would be more about the savers for lenders and clients for investors. And the client engagement will be more focused on the counterparties for lenders and the investees for investors. And then we've got the two last modules, the policy engagement. How does the financial institution influence public policies? And the business model, how does it develop business innovation that would be compatible with a low carbon economy? Then after, we can have a look at the examples of questions we could have regarding the indicators within those modules. We have first, we can have first examples of quantitative indicators. Next slide, please. So if we take the example of the target module, the kind of questions we could raise and the kind of question we can discuss, it's what about the aggregation of targets, especially when a financial institution could have targets for a specific asset class or a target for a portfolio or even a sector, knowing that a sector could use different decarbonization scenario in order to benchmark its own performance. We also have to consider that they could operate in different geographic zones and that all sectors also have different importance in the global decarbonization efforts. We could also have a discussion on carbon intensity denominator. Is absolute emission enough to track the targets, or should we also have indicators about intensity such as economic intensity, and should it be by revenue, by enterprise value, by market capitalization, or should we also have production carbon intensity for the sector targets? Regarding the portfolio performance, other discussions we could have on the quantitative indicators is all the discussions around the carbon accounting. Kind of the same as with the target, how do we aggregate the emissions, especially when asset classes have different indicators? I'm thinking about maybe sovereign bonds against pure equity and across sectors as well. And also, how do we attribute the emissions, a company's emission to a portfolio? We can also discuss about what is a locked-in emission for a lender. Should we look only at the long-term loans and to which horizon, or should we look at something else? And also, how does it compare? How do those long-term loans compare with new financing? How do we weight the score on these two metrics? And then we'll see also other examples on more qualitative modules on the next slide. For example, in the counterparties engagement, we could discuss about what is a relevant criteria when we want to have financing condition towards a company or a consumer. And also, if we take the examples of green bonds, what kind of green bonds is green enough to be acceptable as a good low carbon financing vehicles, or which criteria should we use in, for example, sustainability linked notes? Also, how should we consider exclusion in our financing? Is there any proper escalation process that has a proper impact on your counterparties? I think that's something really important that has to be raised at some point. If we take the example of the business model, we could also discuss about which solution needs financing in order to enable the low carbon economy, and also what are the advanced practice on the impact that a financial institution could have. All these questions are just what we have prepared for this webinar, and we think that's a good starting point for discussions during the technical working group, and they are all based from the existing literature on the next slide. that we have tried to represent here. So our preparation work was based on the different initiatives, standards, frameworks, regulations, but this is just for illustration, and that's definitely not an exhaustive list. And what will be also very important during those technical working groups is to rely on your expertise and on your own knowledge and your own expertise. But because the main point is here, what we want to have during this technical working group is a collaborative development in order to get those two methodologies.
Thank you very much, Kim, for the many insights. Thank you all for also your contribution in real time. We can see that there are many interesting questions. Target is not to provide you definitive answers, but also to co-construct these answers with you in the technical working group. So I would pick some at the end of the Q&A session, but keep in mind that some questions will have to be also answered together. So if I can sum up, we see that the key message here is to build together with a financial institution a methodology that takes into account the specifics of financial institutions, in particular for banks and investors. If we move on to the next and final part before the Q&A session, Simon, could you please tell us how to get involved into co-constructing this Act for Finance methodology?
Sure, of course, and I think the co-construction bit is a really important bit before I even get into the technical detail, because we will come back to, there's probably about 10 questions I think that haven't been answered yet. Quite a number of them go into a fairly significant amount of technical depth in terms of talking about different asset classes and external methodologies and the like. The idea here is, without reinventing the wheel in terms of seeing different references made to many different either initiatives or standards or asset classes, it's using a lot of the I guess work that already exists in the I guess in the market, in the world right now, and I guess building on that, and obviously using the ACT methodology in terms of the structure, but throughout, and in the slide after this one, I'll get to the technical, or the working groups and how they're going to be set up. The idea is that this is an open conversation, and that nothing is, I guess, shut, and that there may be some asset classes which are covered because there's other methodologies and tools which exist which allow us to cover them, and there will be some which can't be covered because either the data doesn't exist now and is not likely to exist soon, the methodologies don't exist, other initiatives don't account for it, and the like. So very, I guess, collaborative process that we're looking for. Yeah. So back to what I was meant to be saying in terms of the time frame. The idea here is that the core work, once we've recruited both financial institutions and technical experts, will kick off next month, so in April. Then there's going to be a 6 to 7 month period, which will focus on the core methodological development. At the end of this, there will be a consultation period, all feedback integrated and the like. And following this feedback, there's then going to be a 6 months, I guess, period of road testing, where we will work with a smaller subset of financial institutions to, I guess, test the methodology before it's officially finalized. This is very much a similar process to how the other 15 sectors were done in the last few years, and like. In terms of the, on the next slide, now I'll talk about the proposed governance before then coming back to the working group structures. So in terms of the governance here, at the top of the structure sits the steering committee. Now on the steering committee, there's going to be the ADEME, CDP, and the World Benchmarking Alliance, as well as industry representatives, which is the bit we've not said who it is because we're looking to finalize it, but the idea is there will be another partner in the steering committee. Their purpose is to, essentially oversee the whole program. So, there is governance, the direction of the project, and of course, ensure that the deliverables match with initial expectations, and that where there's a need for strategic or operational collaboration with others, they have that kind of the high-level oversight and can direct the work. Beneath this is the secretariat, They are the ones who will be managing the project on an operational basis, on a daily basis, in effect. And this will be managed by the ADEME. They will be doing a lot of the, I guess, the background work in terms of the analysis, the summarizing information to share with members and the like, and obviously coordinating and managing the working groups. The idea with this, and just before I get onto the working groups, is that, of course, working groups will be giving up, so financial institutions were asking people to contribute their time to it. So whilst we want to maximize the amount of inputs we get from financial institutions, we also want to limit, I guess, the overwhelming amount of time we're asking for people, because we recognize that time is limited. So the more that the ADEME can do on behalf of the financial institutions, the better in terms of making it move forward. So in terms of the working groups themselves, and this comes, I guess it's partly addresses some of the questions that we've had in the chats so far. The idea is they'll be split into two groups. One group is going to focus on lending, and one is going to focus on investments. Again, within that, and this is going to be the purpose of the conversations we have in the next month, next 6 months, I mean, is defining what falls under lending and what falls under investments, because those words as English words make sense, but they imply different definitions for different people, whether it's from a regulatory perspective or just an operational perspective. So whilst we welcome all feedback, of course, on the terminology, this is something that we will be looking at to define going forward. So we hope to have roughly 20 financial institutions in each of these groups, and of course anyone who wants to be part of both can be part of them. And within that, we will also look to complement them by additional experts. So, these will be people who may be representing initiatives, or people who are, just core academic technical experts in the field, many different options, or even, I guess, theoretically data providers and the like. And each of these groups, therefore, one of them is going to focus on the methodological development for credit or for lending. And on the other, there's of course an overlap between the two, and this is where the secretariat's role will be essential in terms of coordinating that where overlap there is, say on governance, for instance, where there's a lot of similarities between all types of financial institutions. That points will be the same, but when there's a need to deep dive into exactly how a financial institution works, then that splits. These working groups will meet monthly, and that is where the core technical decisions take place. As I said, beneath that there are these technical advisory experts groups, which I'll come to afterwards, and in that the idea is that we'll have a pool of, say, let's call them 20 experts, who we're working with quite closely, and ensure that they, when needed, we get them to feed in, whether it's regards to methodologies and the like. Just because I was looking at the screen and then I saw a question pop up asking how this links to the work in the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. I mean, the short answer is looking to to build on that, and to whether it's Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance or any other alliance or initiatives, the key I guess structural points that come out of that in terms of whether it's the protocol or the positions or the technical recommendations get integrated where needed with regards to the investment work that's here. Karen's question, how do we cover FIs that do both lending and investing, is one of these questions that precisely we need to work out with everyone in terms of, do you then do a and I'm simplifying it here for the question, for the case of the question that we do a weighting that say X% of the score is allocated to, say, I don't know, if 30% of the business is lending, then 30% of their score comes from the lending criteria and 70% from the investment. Are there many other options, or do we actually within that have a subset kind of calculation method for exactly this type of financial institutions? This is a bit that we need to, of course, finalize with the inputs of different people. I'm going to stop reading the questions because otherwise I'm not going to move on with the next slide, but we'll come back to the other ones afterwards. So this slide provides you with a similar information to what we had just before, but it is just slightly flipped. The main bit, which is different, is to draw out the sector focus at the bottom. As we know, sector-specific considerations are critical in financial institutions like management of the climate impact, so it feels appropriate to have subgroups which will ensure precisely, I think, some of the points here, that some of the work that is developed in other initiatives and alliances is included in the analysis where relevant. And I think there's and yes, and so the exact timing of the meetings in a TBC, but the idea is that, as I said, each of these core working groups meets on a monthly basis, and then we may have sector specific monthly meetings. It may be that we focus on one sector, and then it's TBC here, but one sector in April, one in May, one in June, and so forth, where both lenders and investors come together. In terms of the final slide, I mean, this is a very quick one. It's just to present some of the members of the secretariat right now, most of whom are on the call. The slide is changing out, but in essence, you have in no particular order. I mean, the slides will be circulated, so you'll be able to see all of the detailed CVs. But Romain, Nathalie, Kim, Mathieu, Marine, and myself, who have been working for the last few months to build on the previous ACT initiatives, previous ACT initiatives work for the 15 sectors. But of course, this is like any methodological development. Developing the skeleton is a first step, but the getting into the weeds, to use a British expression, is the most important step, and this is what the next 6 months is going to be, and where we will really value the inputs of everyone. So back to you, Marine, now.
Thanks a lot, Simon, and for all the speakers also for the many insights shared on Act for Finance. Before moving on the Q&A session, we are now going to ask you something for the session using the quick live survey that should be displayed in your Zoom chat. We would like to have your feedbacks on the technical groups you would like to participate in based on the presentation that have been done so far to highlight the key messages, and it will help us also to provide some further answers to the questions. So in the meantime, we're gonna select some question from the audience, and we'll go back to the results of this survey in a few minutes. So please start answering them now. So first question, I would like to come back to the link between ACT methodology and some initiative like 2DI, for example. How do you leverage on past works that some financial institution might already be involved into?
Yes, maybe I can take this question. Yes, I have seen that people asked if the presentation was going to be sent by email. Sure, and notably in the appendix, we have quite a lot of slides on different elements on what are the different initiatives, the concept of ACT, the same deep dive approach on investors, some quick overview of the term of reference, and some questions on the ACT initiative, on the Act for Finance initiative consideration to date. So I think that this will also answer some question that I've seen on the chat. And I think I can stop sharing my screen. But yeah, for the question, it was specifically on 2DI. Actually, we are working quite in collaboration for a few years now with 2DI. Basically, the idea is that we have very different modules in the ACT initiative. And for instance, on the performance portfolio performance module, sure, it's definitely going to be a key tool to analyze and understand the portfolio performance of a financial institution. So to make a bigger answer, yes, we are going to use for many of the works that have been produced to date. The idea is not to recreate new frameworks on each of the modules we have designed to date, which are, by the way, subject to discussion. But for instance, on the targets module, we are going to take various frameworks like, for instance, SBTI, but also UNEP-FI that have made also a great work on target setting through net zero alliances, regulation as well, reporting. European regulation also has made great work on that. So for portfolio performance, sure, we are going to also use the CDP temperature rating, maybe the 2DI tool, maybe also. So we are going to consider all the tools existing and used by the market. This is clearly the idea. And yes, maybe I have answered the question.
Thank you, Natal. Another one, would investors who invest through asset managers be assessed based on their engagement with their asset managers?
But that's a good point. Clearly is going to be in the methodology, but because we have made first reflection on that. So first answer would be is we are going to talk obviously about that on technical working groups, and second answer is that clearly for us it's part of the engagement module, and we have to define what metrics or indicators we can design to measure this. And yes, clearly it's definitely a point that we are going to take into account.
Thank you. What is the link between the ACT score of financial lenders and ACT score of the borrowers?
I'll let Anatol answer, but just to jump in, I mean, in essence, as I said, this question may have come up before, I mentioned it just before, but the idea is that as I think it was Anatol who explained it before, there's three, in essence, bits to a score, to an ACT score. There's the performance score, the narrative score, and the trend score. Within the performance score, there's a number of different modules, some are related to targets, some with regards to management, some with regards to supply engagement, client engagement, business model, and the like. And then, of course, there's an assessment in the other ones as to the trend in terms of how they're actually performing against these different bits. So there are some bits which overlap, say business model. I mean, of course, there's subsets in terms of assessing different business models because different financial institutions can achieve different different business models, but there are other bits which will be really specific. For instance, and the idea here isn't to have a and I'm simplifying it here to be able to paraphrase, but the idea is not just to have a really simple finance sector assessment tool where all financial institutions are treated the same. The idea is to try to keep the exercise as, I guess, simple as possible to avoid making something which is incredibly or overcomplicated, but to really take into account specificities. So there's a link. The score is always presented the same in terms of the end output, which is scored out of a 20 and then a letter and then a plus and minus sign. But the idea is that you would, as an external stakeholder looking at the score, be able to judge, I guess, or to understand overall scores between them. But if you dive into the detail, comparing a pure lender to a pure asset manager, you would have different data points that would be coming up.
Thank you very much, Simon. Another one, do we expect the narrative piece to be accessible based on what is expected from a good TCFD report?
So the narrative score, can we assess the narrative score from a TCFD report? The thing is, the narrative score is here to bring together all pieces of data we could gather. The performance score is really an assessment of KPIs on decarbonization KPIs, and we look at each module individually. And the narrative score, we try to tie them all together, plus all the information we could gather externally from the company. So TCFD could be a source of the scoring of this score, but it depends on what we have available.
Maybe we answered partly to that question, but it would be useful for the audience to have this insight. Will indicators / modules always be aggregated via some weighting factor, or will they be separate, or will there be an option to see both? We kind of answered already, but
that's typically the kind of questions we need to address during technical working groups. We have examples in the past in other methodologies where the value chain could change between within a sector, and we had to weight differently if I take the cement industry, for example, if we had like a fully integrated cement factory from clinker production to cement, or only cement production, we would use different weighting depending on are they fully integrated or not. So we could have the similar approach within financial institutions, but that's something we have to address to technical working groups. So obviously we don't bring a solution. We just bring a lot of pieces and we try to all put them together. And we want people around the table to bring their expertise and their experience to build a collaborative methodology, basically.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kim. As reminded, we already said that some of the questions are still open questions, and target is really to get you involved into answering to them. Hence the webinar today, who aim to ask us a good question and to be a teaser for you to contribute to the right answers. Another one that hasn't been addressed so far: how much of this process will be automated to accelerate the assessment of companies?
Yeah. Here we will develop the methodology. The way it is used or implemented by others is we will not assess financial institutions ourselves. So we develop the methodology and we try to provide the methodology to the public or to the market. And then if somebody finds a way to automate it, fine. But here we are really speaking about developing the methodology and not really assessing companies or financial institutions. And the same, we are only developing the methodology. We don't provide a data set that will fit this methodology.
Yes, if I can sum up, we can't be judge and jury at the same time. So basically, target is also to have a robust methodology which can be trusted. For the result of the survey, if I can quickly tell you the results before moving on to further questions. So we can see that it's really, I would say, equilibrate, because we have 30%, around 30% for the technical working group for investors, but we have also advisory experts, which are also around 30%. We have 16% for the banks technical working group, and we have 40% that people who need to think about it. So I think that we gave a lot of materials for you to think about. Maybe a last one before before ending this webinar. I see that there are many questions around, we already saw the difference of ACT with other initiatives and how it leverage on many. We have also a question regarding the to what extent can ACT score be used to evaluate and validate not only the financial institution strategies and their quantitative and qualitative aspects, but also the implementation of the strategy and the effectiveness of the action taken by financial institutions. In a few words, 1 minute left.
Yes. But for me, it's actually the output of the ACT assessment. Is
Exactly.
when you have a bad score, it means that you didn't act and didn't implement a strong and relevant strategy. So
it was the occasion to sum up actually what this webinar was about. So thank you very much for all the participants for this active contribution. And we end this webinar on this conclusion. And if this webinar did raise interest for you, we invite you to mobilize your network of financial institutions for some that could be also interested to contribute in. So many thanks to all of you. Have a great day or evening, depending on your time zone, and and goodbye.
Thank you.